Hello, everyone, and welcome to part 2 of week 4 of ITEC 4242 Database Administration. As I discussed in part 1, I'm kind of divvying this up between textbook and module so that it's easy access. If you need to access one, you can, and it makes rendering these a lot easier. That, and I can actually address textbook a lot easier than I can the modules sometimes because I have to actually test this before you guys do it, which sometimes has lackluster results. Anyway, for this module, which it helps if I actually have the right number in here. For Module 3, we're going to be continuing with exploring database objects. In particular, we're going to be discussing triggers, functions, and procedures. For the required reading for the week, we already addressed 6 and 7 in part 1. As far as these links are concerned, I kind of wanted to show you the developer links first, simply because they are like this. And oh boy, this is a fun read. What does all this gobbledygook mean? Well, fortunately, I found an easier to read, easier to understand tutorial for you guys to look over this week. Now, fortunately, I'm not just leaving you to your own devices and just giving you this and saying, "Hey, I'm just gonna let you guys read this on your own and good luck with that." I'm actually gonna go over using MySQL Workbench this week. Some of you are probably saying it is about dang time. Some of you are perfectly fine with that. Whatever the case may be, we're going to actually use MySQL Workbench in this lecture video, so don't worry about that. But as far as the sections to cover, to kind of get you familiar with it on this site, there are multiple trigger sections as well as functions, procedures, and there's actually oddly a return section, which I found odd considering the nature of functions. As far as what triggers, functions, and procedures are, they are database objects that, as I kind of addressed before, databases over the years have kind of gotten a little bit more complicated and have started housing, not in recent years, but as databases progressed over the years, they started getting PL/SQL, or programming language SQL, as Oracle will put it, procedural code, basically ways of performing code inside the database without having to rely on an application to do the work. And what these functions and procedures will do, sometimes there's really not a limit to what they do in a sense. The general idea is to interact with data in a valuable way, whether it's to kind of produce a select statement that's desirable. Sometimes they can actually create mail to send from the database to users based on data inside the database. Sometimes they're there to manipulate the data. Say, for example, with triggers, it may be used to update or insert records into another table based off of the transactions that you have performed. And sometimes when check constraints don't work in a system, triggers can be used as an alternative means for simulating this. Sometimes it can go in and act as check constraints, which, guess what you'll be doing this week? Right off the bat, number one, it requires you to create two triggers, one for the products table and one for the orders table. And these will check. These will actually do what the check constraints on our last assignment should have done. They'll check for negative values, and if there are negative values, it will throw an error. And I will get into how to throw errors and everything else. MySQL, we'll get to that. But not only do you need two triggers, since the error message is going to be roughly the same, we're going to actually use procedures to create the error message. And both of these triggers will have access to this procedure. So 2 triggers, 1 procedure, and provide screenshots. I'm trying to be a little bit more clear on what screenshots are supposed to do. I'm sorry if I haven't been as clear. Again, first-time professor, you guys are all the guinea pigs. Congratulations. But the screenshots are going to show that, 1, the trigger does not hinder entering positive values, because the trigger itself, it's against the table, but you want to have it fire and interact with your data in certain scenarios. And I want to show that the triggers, these particular triggers, stop negative values from occurring. Now, I've mentioned in other videos that I don't like the action output, but in this particular scenario, I'm wanting the action output. Anyway, number 2 is to generate and execute code to drop the triggers performed in step 1. No screenshot required here. I just want the drop statements, and it is beneficial for the later parts of this module to execute these, because it'll be evidenced that you have actually performed these with the steps that you will be doing. So no screenshot is required. We'll address why here in a minute. I keep saying that. It's like, address it later, address it later. I'll get to it. Anyway, number 3 is to create an after trigger on the orders table. We'll actually be specific. I'm trying to be clear, like I said. There we go. On the orders table to deduct the ordered quantity from the product's quantity. And while the triggers will stop this, but it may not prevent the order from occurring. So in step 2, you need to delete that so that the values can go negative. And sometimes within a business, it's actually a good idea to have negative values stored in a quantity value to show when a company needs to order more parts. They're on back order. So whether you want to prevent negative values from occurring, or whether you actually allow negative values to occur, it all really depends on the organization whether or not they're allowed. So in this particular scenario, you can have negative values and make sure to include your screenshots before and after the transaction to prove your results. I've kind of referenced that before should occur. You should have a before screenshot just to verify that, hey, this was the data before it happened. This is this after it happened. And I addressed this a little bit in the module. Okay, lab 2 or lab 2. I really should align the numbers. It gets confusing. But in lab 2, I addressed in your graded papers that sometimes before and after screenshots are beneficial because it shows that your queries, your transactions, your code actually resulted in this change in the data. It's not just some sort of fluke. Okay, and number 4 is to create a function to retrieve the description from the products table based on product ID. All right, now that we've gone over that, let's visit our good old friend MySQL Workbench. So here we have a prime example of what you're actually going to be doing. This is actually pretty close to what you're going to be turning in. So you may want to pay attention now. Maybe take notes. Kind of eye this with intent because this is really close. And I'll show you how close this is. Basically, this trigger will take and it will check to see if the new quantity on products is less than 0. Create a message. Message is a varchar variable, and you declare it here. Declare MSG varchar 128 and end in a semicolon. Just as any programming, you have an if statement, and it looks like this. And you set the message value equal to this string. And this isn't actually, this full thing is not required. I don't really care either way. If you want to have the table name, that's going to be a little bit of work on your part. Maybe bonus points, maybe not. All depends. But in this particular scenario, this is your message. And it, as we can see here, we have a new dot quantity. To clarify for triggers what the new variable is, it's whatever your new quantity is in the products table. In particular, in this insert, whatever quantity value you're inserting, it'll actually be a variable that you can use and manipulate. And here, signal SQL state 45,000 set message underscore text equal to the message. I may very well go ahead, after this is said and done, modify the module document, and I will provide this particular line in the module document so that you can copy and paste it, because I'm not having you guys memorize it. But this signal SQL state is what throws the error message. Now, the only difference between this and what you're going to be doing for your assignment is basically that. What this does, and I'm not going to show you what I am error code looks like. That's for you all to create on your own. That's the objective of the assignment. But I am error is a procedure that takes in the table value or the table name, and all it really does is spits this out. It's actually pretty much just those two lines with a begin and an end statement. You don't have to have this. As I said, if you want to throw the table name in there to customize what the error message looks like, then be my guest. I will give bonus points if you can figure it out. The promise of bonus before I actually give it out. Now, something else that some of you may have noticed so far and some of you may not, are the inclusion of this delimiter // and semicolon. Pretty much, if you do not have these, this will not work. This is a weird little quirk with MySQL. And basically what it does is, and this is for triggers, functions, and procedures, it's for every one of these. It, by default, the delimiter is a semicolon. And if you don't change it, it just bugs out because it sees this as the end of the create trigger and it errors out. And it's kind of a funky error because it's like, well, you're missing a semicolon. Well, no, I'm not. But essentially, what you need, and it doesn't have to be double // it could be any variety of symbol that you want. So long as it's not some stored character, it might just be better if you did double / because it works. But put that before and put this after, and your triggers, functions, and procedures will work. Without them, they will fail. You have been warned. Okay, now let's go ahead and take a look at procedure. A procedure, the difference between a procedure and a procedure simply processes and runs code. And a function actually returns a value. Now, procedures and functions both can take in variables and either manipulate them or deal with them in some sort of way. In this particular scenario, we have an out variable, which is, it can be manipulated by whatever the calling process is. There are in variables where it takes in the value, but the calling process does not care what the result is in the procedure. It doesn't return it like a function does. And in out, it manipulates the parameter, the variable, inside your procedure. And when you get out of the call procedure, it can be further manipulated and its value is stored. Now, what do I mean by the called process or called procedure or whatever? Well, that would possibly be, in this particular case, this right here. The products would be a result where you wouldn't need to manipulate the value in the procedure. So that's how you would associate whether it's in, out, or in, out. And it gets more into it in the reading material, the more confusing MySQL reading material. I suggest exploring it so that you can kind of figure out and see if it explains it a little bit better than I just did. I probably just confused a bunch of people. It explains a little bit better in the documentation, I think. But in this particular procedure, we simply run a simple proc based on some sort of parameter, and it selects a count based on the customers table. So let's see what that looks like. In order to use a procedure, you call it. So we call the procedure, and you do at whatever your variable name is. And as you can see, it has called the variable, or it's called simple proc. I'm going to clear this. And then what you do is you select the variable. And in this particular case, since there are 3 customers in the customers table, you get a result of 3. And we're just going to get rid of that result right there. Clear that out. And let's move on to functions. Okay, as I said, functions return a value. And in this particular function, hello, which I borrowed from the source documentation that I have you guys reading, deterministic and non-deterministic, the differences between these, and this seems like a MySQL quirk, but deterministic is essentially your function is going to return the same value every time based on the input that you put in. Non-deterministic is, it can vary. Such as, let's say you're pulling something that changes like table data, then it may very well be non-deterministic. In this particular one, and we don't actually need the beginning and end statement, but to be consistent, I put them in. What this does is returns hello and the s variable. And we'll go ahead and test that. And I've got it set up for select hello class. Oh, helps if I actually click the right button. And bam, it outputs hello class. Pretty straightforward. No rocket science here. So we'll move on to a little bit more complicated function. This is really close to what you're going to be doing for homework. Really, just change a few things. Basically, your table value, like instead of customers, I believe it's product. So, again, pay attention to this. What this does is it takes in a value that you provide and it returns some sort of character. And what this does is based on the integer value that was put in, it pulls that as the customer ID and returns the concatenated first and last name into a value and then returns value. Pretty straightforward. So we do. Did I not save this? Oh, there it is. It's just at the bottom for some reason. And bam! It pulls Jarvis Hester. And if we look at customers, of course, the number one is Jarvis Hester. Let's change this to 2. Benny Wynn. And sure enough, it's Benny Wynn. Hooray! And no, my value is not changed. Shame on me for having the same address before the update that we had in the other module. But I don't have to get my points deducted. Maybe in my review, when you guys are reviewing me, you'll deduct points for. It's like, how dare you not have the up-to-date code? That's because I kept deleting it and having to recreate it based off of what you provided me. So, so that's pretty much what we're looking at as far as procedures, functions, and triggers. Now, as far as drop statements, here's a fine selection of drop trigger, procedure, and function statements. Very straightforward. Drop whatever the object type is and the name of the object. And I think that pretty well covers the material for the week. So, if you guys have any questions, let me know. I know sometimes that I can't be as clear as possible. Well, can't is a strong word. That I'm not as clear as possible sometimes. See, I'm already messing up the lines that I'm saying. I'm more than willing to work with you all. If you have questions, let me know. I've worked with quite a few of you so far, and I know this can be a little overwhelming, but here's a good news for next week. We're going to deviate from code. And everybody says, amen. So let's end things there. Stop sharing. And